2 years later, Miyazaki decided to take another shot of his magic after Spirited Away with Howl's Moving Castle, based on a novel of the same name by Diana Wynne Jones. The movie is about Sophie, who is cursed to become an old woman by the Witch of the Waste. As she escapes the town into the hills, she then encounters a giant mobile castle, owned by a wizard named Howl and being moved by a fire demon named Calcifer. Sophie made a deal with Calcifer that he'd break her curse only if she can free him from Howl. But now that they're all in the middle of a big war between two kingdoms, Sophie must go save Howl and the people in the castle in order to bring her back to normal. On September 2001, Studio Ghibli announced 2 new projects they wanted to make. There was The Cat Returns and an adaptation of Jones' novel, and it was originally going to be directed by Mamoru Hosoda, who would later on direct several acclaimed Japanese animated features like The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, Summer Wars, and Wolf Children. However, because the heads of Ghibli didn't like many of his ideas, Hosoda quit the project. During that time, Miyazaki wanted to retire after making Spirited Away. But because he didn't want to leave such a good idea left on the shelf, he decided might as well come back and take on the role of the writer and director. As it is an adaptation, it doesn't completely follow the book with some significant differences. The main plot stays the same about Sophie's adventure of trying to lift the curse off of her so that she can no longer be old, but there are a few elements that were either switched or added for the film. Some of these include Howl's issue of not picking a side for the Great War instead of his womanizing problem, Sophie doesn't have any magic, and the Witch of the Waste is now just a side character instead of the main villain. For the setting and backgrounds, Miyazaki and his crew did some research in Calmar and Requenier in France to examine the architecture and the environment around it. As for the moving castle that's comprised of more than 80 different elements, they took a look at the works of Albert Robina for inspiration. The first time the film was ever shown to anyone in its complete form was back in the summer of 2004, when Miyazaki gave a private screening of the film to Diana Wynne Jones. After watching it, she said, and I quote, "It's fantastic. No, I have no input. I write books, not films. Yes, it will be different from the book. In fact, it's likely to be very different. But that's as it should be. It will still be a fantastic film." The movie would then have its world premiere at the Venice Film Festival on September 5th, 2004, and it was released in Japan on November 20th, 2004 with great results. It got a total of 23.2 billion yen at the box office, and critics seemed to really enjoy it, saying that Howl's Moving Castle will delight children with its fantastical story and touch the hearts and minds of older viewers as well. Although there would barely be anyone who would say that this movie is bad, some critics though, like Roger Ebert and Doug Walker, would say that this is one of Miyazaki's more weaker works. On the English dub, the role of directors were assigned to voice director Rick Dempsey and the Pixar director of Up and Inside Out, Pete Docter. It's interesting to note that in the original Japanese version, Sophie was completely played by Chieko Bashio. But in English, the role was split in two for Emily Mortimer to play the young Sophie and Gene Simmons as the grandma version, which this was Gene's last theatrical film before she passed away in 2010. For some of the other actors, they were actually excited to play their roles, considering that they are fans of Miyazaki's works, like Lauren Bacall as the Witch of the Waste and Christian Bale as Howl. Other notable actors in the English dub include Billy Crystal as Calcifer, Josh Hutcherson as Markel, and Gina Malone as Letty, whom the last two would later work with each other on the Hunger Games movies. The film would go on to win several awards, like 3 Tokyo Anime Awards, the Excellence Prize for Animation at the Japan Media Arts Festival, and got an Oscar nomination for Best Animated Feature, but lost to Aardman's Wallace and Gromit: The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. It also got nominated for 3 Annie Awards, including Best Writing, Best Directing, and Best Animated Feature. The movie would also go on to influence several filmmakers, including Gore Verbinski and his crew, in order to create the award-winning film Rango. After that, it was time for a new director to test out if he has what it takes to be in charge of a Ghibli film. Since we know what Miyazaki can do, let's see if one of his offsprings can make the same magic with Tales from Earthsea. Set during a strange and dark period in the Middle Ages, where the world has become unbalanced, weird phenomenons have occurred, and wizards and witches are losing their power, a young prince named Aaron got a magical sword from his father. And by got, I mean he stabbed his dad, stole his sword, and left him to die. Okay, what a way to make a first impression there, kid. While heading out, he meets a few other people like a wizard named Sparrowhawk, his friend Tenar, and a girl named Teru. But then, an evil wizard named Cobb is seeking for eternal life, and what's separating him from his goal is Sparrowhawk, and would do anything to live forever. Now Aaron must go stop Cobb and to discover what's actually wrong with him. The idea of the movie actually existed for a good while before this one even came out. In fact, there were several people who wanted to make the film. The only problem? Ursula K. Le Guin, the author of the Earthsea book series. From time to time, she would often get requests to turn her books into a film, but she would refuse every last one of them. Even Hayao Miyazaki tried to request Ursula to make an adaptation in the 80s, but again, she said no to him, thinking that he would just turn it into a Disney film. It wasn't until a couple of decades later when she finally saw some of his works like Spirited Away, and called him back to say that she wanted him to direct the adaptation. That's awesome! Only one problem though. He was too busy working on Howl's moving castle. However, because Toshio Suzuki didn't want a golden opportunity like this to go to waste, he assigned a small group of animators to take charge of the project on October 2003, one of which would later stand out from the crowd. Enter Goro Miyazaki, who never believed that he would live up to his dad's reputation, so he decided to become a landscaper and graduated at Shinshu University School of Agriculture. After that, he got into Ghibli after working on the design of the Ghibli Museum. When he got into the Earthsea project, he was in charge of drawing the storyboards. Surprisingly, he actually has a lot of talent. He even impressed some of the big-name Japanese animators like Hideaki Anno and Yasuo Otsuka. Because of this, Suzuki felt confident to give the directing job to Goro. However, not everybody is happy with this decision. You see, despite being his son, Goro and Hayao's relationship is not really that good. Actually, there's barely even a relationship. In fact, there was some blood boiling between the two during production because of Goro's lack of experience in the field of animation. But back onto the movie, it wasn't based on a single Earthsea book. It's actually a combination of the first 4 books, including A Wizard of Earthsea, The Tombs of Atuan, The Farthest Stone, and Tahanu, and the title was taken from the collection of short stories from the series. Not only that, but there are plenty of elements that were taken from his dad's graphic novel, The Journey of Shuna, which is something that Hayao would also do for his movies. When it was released on July 29th, 2006, it did do decently well with 8.4 billion yen at the box office, but in terms of everyone's reaction to the film itself, it was rather mixed. Some like Empire magazine say that it was well worth watching, while others like Radio Times say that it lacks the technical sheen and warm sentimentality of some of Ghibli's earlier films. Even Le Guin herself feels pretty mixed about it. She would praise about the animation and how it depicts nature, but she was rather disappointed that the story was completely different from the books. On August 13th, 2010, Disney gave the film a limited release in the US and brought out a DVD on March 8th, 2011 with an English dub that features Timothy Dalton as Sparrowhawk, Willem Dafoe as Cobb, Cheech Marin as Hare, and many more. Because of some scenes that depict some graphic violence like this one, This movie is actually marked as Disney's first ever animated feature with a PG-13 rating. Now, when I would say something like, in terms of awards here, that would usually mean a good thing, like, this movie was good enough to win something. This, however, is not the case. Sure, it was one of the first films ever to be nominated at the Japanese Academy Awards for Animation of the Year in 2007, which it lost to The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, but it also won twice at Japan's Bunshun Raspberry Awards. And it's exactly what you think. It's the Japanese equivalent of the Razzie Awards, and Goro was unlucky enough to claim Worst Director and Worst Picture. But if I may end this on a lighter note, during the preview screening back in 2006, there was one guy who made a surprise visit. That was Hayao Miyazaki, and he told Goro about the movie that it was an honest way of making it. It was good. So now that the son had his time to play around at the studio, it's now Daddy's turn to get back to work in order to make Ponyo. It's the story of a little goldfish who finds herself with a boy named Satsuke, and he decided to call her Ponyo. When she returned to her house with her father, Fujimoto, a great wizard who gave up on humanity because of the humans' treatment to the sea, she told him she doesn't want to be a fish and rather wants to be a human with Satsuke. Fujimoto said no, but screw it, she doesn't anyways. But without Ponyo in the sea, the world has gone completely off balance, and Fujimoto is now trying to find a way to restore it. The idea of the movie was inspired by Hans Christian Andersen's classic fairy tale, The Little Mermaid. However, Hayao Miyazaki's inspiration was more abstract than to make his version of the story like what Disney did. He most likely just wanted to play with the bare concepts of the tale. Originally, it would have been a story of a boy and his frog, but he didn't know how to make that frog into a fully fleshed out character. So the simple solution to that was to turn her into a goldfish, of course. As for the boy Satsuke, Miyazaki based him on his son Goro when he was 5, and his name was taken from the protagonist of the novel The Gate by Natsume Soseki. Interestingly enough, even if the movie advertises that The Little Mermaid was the main source of inspiration, there are plenty of elements in the story that were taken from Richard Wagner's opera series, Der Ring des Nibelungen. Some of these include Ponyo's real name as Broomhilda, like one of the main characters in the opera, the plot element of a supernatural being falling in love with a human, and in the music in one scene where you can hear a little tribute to Rise of the Valkyries. The production officially began in May of 2006, making a goal for the film to be 100% hand-drawn. Nowhere can you find any traces of CGI used in the film, and the key animations wouldn't begin until about 5 months later. The entire village that the movie takes place in was inspired by Tomonoura, a little town in Seto Nakai National Park where Miyazaki once stayed back in 2005. Speaking of which, he was in charge of animating most of the sea and the waves, and he tried to make sure that they really look expressionistic. Like, this is to clarify that these are Miyazaki waves. So, with that said, because of the amount of detail put into the film, this holds the record of the most images ever appeared in a Miyazaki movie, with a total of 170,000 of them. When it was released on July 19th, 2008, it ended up doing very well with 24.4 billion yen at the box office, and the critics really seemed to enjoy it, saying while not Miyazaki's best film, Ponyo is a visually stunning fairy tale that's a sweetly poetic treat for children of all ages. It became the first ever animated feature to be nominated for Best Film Score at the Japanese Academy Awards, and it won for Animation of the Year. It was also nominated for Best Music and Best Director at the Annie Awards. Not only that, but it was also ranked at number 2 on Detsu's Hit Products in Japan of 2008, right under the Nintendo Wii. For the English version of the film, Disney got the writer of E.T., Melissa Matheson, to translate the script. She did it in a matter of just 4 days, but she would also work with the actors in order to make some revisions. As for directing, there were 3 Pixar guys that stood up to do the task. Of course, there was John Lasseter, but there was also Brad Lewis and The Good Dinosaur director Peter Sohn. For the voice of Ponyo and Satsuki, the daughter of the executive producers Frank Marshall and Kathleen Kennedy recommended getting the siblings of then popular Disney Channel stars, specifically Miley Cyrus' sister Noah as Ponyo and the missing Jonas brother Frankie as Satsuki. Although they're not as popular as their siblings, they are very lucky enough to avoid the Disney Channel curse. Beforehand, Miyazaki never came to the US since his promotional tour for Princess Mononoke, because he had a bit of a grudge with the country for going to war with Iraq. He even refused to go to the Academy Awards when Spirited Away and Howl's Moving Castle got recognized as a way of protesting. But then, as a favor for his good buddy John, he made a special appearance at the 2009 San Diego Comic-Con to talk about his film. Originally, Miyazaki wanted to create a sequel to Ponyo, but then Toshio Suzuki convinced him that it's probably better to work on a movie that was based on one of his mangas, which I'll talk about later. Later on, the studio picked up another book they wanted to adapt, but this time they want to be more faithful to the book by adapting the novel The Borrowers by Mary Norton into the secret world of Arrietty. In a world like our own, there live these tiny people who are the size of insects called borrowers. One of them, Arrietty, has been spotted by a sick boy named Sho. As time would move on, the two would learn more about each other and the problems they have to go through. But then Haru, the maid of Sho's house, discovers Arrietty's family and wants to prove to everyone that there are little people among us and she's not crazy. So now Arrietty has to save her borrower parents while trying to secretly keep in touch with Sho. This is actually not the first nor the last time that the novel was adapted. Although this is the first telling of the story in animation, there have been several works based on the borrowers made for film and television. These include the 1973 and 2011 made-for-TV movies that aired on NBC and BBC One respectively, the 1992 miniseries by the BBC, and the 1997 movie featuring John Goodman, Jim Broadbent, and Hugh Laurie. In fact, both Hayao Miyazaki and Isao Takahata had been thinking about making a Borrowers movie for 40 years. After finishing up Ponyo, Miyazaki started developing the ideas for this Borrowers film as an 80-minute feature simply called Little Arrietty. However, Miyazaki wouldn't immediately jump in as director after he made his last film. The heads at Ghibli decided to go take a chance and give the directing job to longtime Ghibli animator Hiromasa Yonebayashi. At the age of 36 when he made Arrietty, he was the youngest director to ever work at Studio Ghibli, even more than Goro Miyazaki when he did Earthsea at 39. In fact, Yonebayashi was supposed to be the director of that film before Goro came along. Most likely, as anyone would, he was pretty nervous to be the solo director of this film, and he would often run around the studio to find Miyazaki for any sort of help. However, like a coming-of-age movie, Yonebayashi discovered that this was a mission he must do on his own, and he drew the storyboards for the film. Afterwards, the heads at Ghibli were quite impressed. Even Miyazaki came to congratulate him for going on his own path. When looking for someone to score the film, Toshio Suzuki got a present from French singer Cécile Courbet, because she was a big Studio Ghibli fan. It was her second album, and Suzuki decided to take a listen. It turned out to be really nice, and he called in Cécile to be the movie's score composer and to make Arrietty's song.
Feel my hair blowing in the wind, see the sky in the summer rain, pick a flower from the garden.
When it was released on July 17th, 2000, the movie ended up doing very well, with critics really liking what Yonebayashi has done, saying that by being visually lush, refreshingly free from family-friendly clatter, and anchored with soulful depth, the secret world of Arrietty lives up to Studio Ghibli's reputation. At the box office, it made a total of 14.4 billion yen, with 7.5 million people who went to see it in Japan, which makes it a new Japanese record for a movie made by a first-time director. For the first time since Porco Rosso, this movie has 2 different English dubs. One was made by Studio Canal for the UK, released on July 29, 2011, featuring a cast of Saoirse Ronan, Tom Holland, and Olivia Colman. The other was made by Disney for North America, released on February 17, 2012, and the cast includes Amy Poehler, Will Arnett, and Carol Burnett. They also have Bridget Medler as Arrietty and David Henry as Sho, who previously worked together on the Disney Channel show Wizards of Waverly Place. In Disney's version, there have been a couple of small adjustments in order to make it more accustomed to American audiences, like changing some of the names, like from Sho to Sean. His aunt, Sadoko Maki, is now Jessica, and Haru has been changed to Hara. Also, they added an additional monologue in the end of the film to give it more of a closure to know more about what happened to the characters after the story ended. When the Disney dub was released, it set an all-time record for a Ghibli film by not only opening in the most American theaters with 1,522, but it is also the highest grossing film in North America made by the studio with $19.2 million. Also, as of 2015, it is the 4th highest grossing Japanese animated feature in America, right under Yu-Gi-Oh! The Movie, Pokémon The Movie 2000, and Pokémon The First Movie.
I'm the worst kind of whichever the kind that cleans.